Evening all. Okay, hope the board's okay. I thought we could continue looking at some interesting games from Gibraltar, which has finished now. So let's see, actually, some games of Nigel Short were very interesting, and he was making quite a comeback in this tournament towards the end. If we actually see if we can get rid of these white blocks. No, I can't. Okay, forget that. Right. So anyway, let's have a look at the first Nigel Short game that I'd like to look at. Unfortunately, this put an end in round 10 to his hopes of getting into the big prizes towards the end. He was playing Adiban in round 10, and Nigel Short was playing black. Adiban played e4, and Nigel Short chose the Caracan defense, c6. I hope everything's okay on YouTube stream here for the board, by the way. So the Caracan defense, d4, d5, and actually Nigel Short's pet line that he plays himself, he's playing against it now, because white played e5, sometimes called, you know, like Short's system, this advance against the Caracan, which used to have not such a great reputation or popularity. Black now plays bishop f5, and we see knight f3, e6, bishop e2. So the bishop doesn't really want to trade on d3. This would sort out a lot of black's congestion issues as well. By leaving the bishop here, the development of these pieces can be an issue. Ideally, black is aiming for some sort of improved version of the French defense. With this solid pawn structure, black might want to play for c5 later and knight c6. We see here now knight d7. Now white castled, and Nigel Short played a6, which portrays an idea that maybe c5, an early c5 is on the cards, because protecting the b5 square would prevent, for example, bishop b5s later, the pawn on a6. We see knight bd2, and white's play looks fairly solid. This knight is sometimes trying to restrain c5, sometimes, but immediately now black takes the opportunity to play c5. The slightly surprising thing about this is white now doesn't respond trying to play solidly. White tries to blast open the center. White plays c4. I mean, black is lagging behind in development. He hasn't castled yet. But black can protect the d5. He doesn't have to take the pawn or anything, or take on d4. He just protects d5 with knight e7. Here, though, white now plays d takes c5, which seems to improve one of black's knights. You know, knight takes c5. But now that's immediately challenged with knight b3. And this d4 square looks quite interesting as well. Nigel Short protects this knight on c5 by playing knight c6. So the bishop is ready in one go to come to c5 here. Here now we see bishop e3. Pardon me, bishop e3. We see. So white's putting more pressure on the central squares, even though he's lost that part of the pawn chain. I think one of the Nimzovichian principles of the center is sometimes you can release literal occupation of the center with pawns if you've got piece control over central squares. Here there's strong piece control from white, especially that d4 square. And now black's battle of the center revolves around what seems to be a simple tactic, which doesn't seem that there's something wrong with it here. Black wants to fight for that d4 square and not allow white, say, a blockade on d4. The knight clearly can't go back. There's a huge pressure on the center like d5. This looks unpleasant. So black played a forcing move. Knight takes b3. We see queen takes b3, And I wonder, in this position, if I pose this to everyone here watching this stream, what do you think, without looking at the score sheet, what would you think of d4 for black? Would you think that's a good idea or a bad idea? d4, if I gave you 20 seconds to think about this, maybe, you know, some thoughts to back it up ideally, or just, you know, good idea or bad idea. Can black get away with d4, would you say, or not? 20 seconds starting from now. I'll pour some lemonade in the meantime. So someone thinks, does anyone think d4 is good? Any thoughts? Does black want to literally occupy the centre with d4 or not? Is it too dangerous? That's the big question here. Well, actually, okay, Nigel did venture d4, and we saw rook fd1, and I guess it was assumed that this could just be supported with bishop c5, and surely now the bishop would just move off and let black have that d pawn. For example, you know, bishop f4. This looks quite comfortable for black. Black could even consider maybe queen b6. And the d pawn, you know, is a strong pass pawn in the centre, potentially, unless it's blockaded. It looks pleasant enough, the position there. But in fact, there's a nasty, shocking move played now. The bishop didn't move. White just played a shocker. White actually played knight takes d4. So what's going on here? Well, this is very interesting. I think if bishop takes d4, possibly this is getting a little bit precarious. I really should have checked this with an engine, but I think queen takes b7, rook c8, bishop f3 looks for example quite dangerous to undermine the pin. There might be stronger, to be honest. I haven't really checked this position in detail, but in the game, knight takes d4 was played, and white takes this and leaves this nasty pin, but how to exploit it? Well, the king's still in the centre actually, so queen a4 check is a bit of a pain here. If b5, I believe c takes b, and we're on d4 like this, so that's pretty nasty. Instead we see king f8, which is not ideal. You really want a castle usually. Check, king g8, and now c5 exploiting the pin, and white has got pressure as well, so there's no way of defending d4 here. The rooks are disconnected. This is not a nice position to have with the black pieces on a one-day game, especially. In a 5-minute game, you know, you could play on here and try and win on time, but not in a one-day game. It's pretty painful to have this position because white's rooks are just connected, everything's out and about. The pawn structure is actually a target for this light square bishop. This bishop's kind of firing against blank air, really. So it's unpleasant. Nigel can actually get a pawn back, though, with bishop takes f2 check, king takes f2. The queen actually guards h4, though. There's no other check immediately, it seems. And there's a problem with b7. So queen c7, getting the queen out of there. But now queen b6, which actually highlights the back row issue. If queen takes e5, we can just play rook d8 and back row issue, mating. So it's an unpleasant position still. From basically like Nigel playing against his own system, really. This e5 against the Caro-Kann is playing against his own system. He plays queen e7. Now bishop f3. It's just an entirely unpleasant situation to be in, with white dominating this central file. We see h5 just offering b7. When b7 goes, we get a passed pawn now. Bishop takes b7. Rook b8, and now c6 is very, very quick. it just seems White's play in this game has been simply to open up things, temporarily sacrifice a piece and get it back with a huge interest dividend. What's to stop c7 now? After king h7, c7 winning the exchange. Rook takes, queen takes. There is a check though. King f1. But now what? h4, trying to undermine White's king safety a bit. Unfortunately, this pawn has a lust to queen here. So king g6 and the pawn just queens, and Nigel has to give up. He gives up in this position. It's quite a devastating defeat, a 28 move win, and a crucial round actually. And it meant that Adiban was well in the prizes. Yeah, in this Gibraltar tournament, coming I think second equal. So yeah, it was quite a dramatic Coracon. If we just quickly check this out again. So this system seems to be quite effective, even against Nigel Short. It's just bishop e2. It seems, at the moment it seemed modest at this point, but then when Black, reacted with c5, White was prepared to give up this d pawn and open up the centre quite violently, and Black's occupation of d4 was punished quite radically with this temporary piece sacrifice, getting things back with interest. So yeah, it just shows that the initiative with White is very, very dangerous. When a player, very resourceful player, has the initiative, and they can do that with the White pieces, it's very, very dangerous. So let's have a look at another game now. And this game, I want to show you one of the eventual winner of the tournament, Ivan Cheparinov. And this is not for the faint-hearted, this game. It's a 46 mover, but I want to show you because it echoes some stuff with me about the d6 pawn in the King's Indian defence. And I still want to play the King's Indian defence occasionally because it's an exciting defence. But there's an issue with d6 when you play the King's Indian defence. Because Black's often setting up a structure like this, and White's often got d-file pressure, and it seems really crazy to play something like c6. So the structure interests me that we're going to see in this game. So Zhu Chen against Ivan Cheparinov, d4, and we see a King's Indian defence, and a very solid fianchetto system from White. So bishop g7, bishop g2, knight c3, d6, knight f3. And now Black just plays for this structure with e5 by playing knight bd7 now. Castles e5. Queen c2. And White's keeping this tension, but as soon as Black releases, although he's got pressure down here, White will have pressure on d6. We see rook e8, rook d1. And now Black does release the tension because things are a little bit congested here. With this tension maintained, it could get a bit nasty for Black. So Black plays e takes d4, knight takes d4, a5, which makes sure that the knight can perch itself on c5 without b4 being a pain. b3, knight c5, and this diagonal can be a pain for White. We see a precautionary rook b1, and maybe also to help support a3 and b4 later. h6, stopping any pin there, taking away the pinning square. e4, White doesn't mind this pressure on e4 at the moment. Queen e7, f3, and now positioning, I think there is a potential threat. This is the problem which you would face as Black, and it's kind of difficult to abstractly try to give some empathy about this. There's a positional threat of knight b5, because how do you get rid of the knight once it's on b5? John Lunn once mentioned this when I was a junior in one of John Lunn's coaching sessions. Once a knight perches on b5, what do you do? So you have to choose this lesser evil, and I was expecting when playing through this game maybe c6 wasn't played, because c6 can lose games literally because of this d6 pawn, this backward d6 pawn on an open file. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter how resourceful you are sometimes. You can lose the game based on that structure. And I've seen it quite a lot in Grandmaster games. Black losing because of this structure. But black does play c6. And this is why the game is quite interesting, just from this structure. So how can white gang up on d6? Is it going to be effective? What can black do in the meantime? Well, white has actually compromised a bit his king safety along this diagonal by playing f3, and this pawn chain here has been slightly compromised. So this plan, although it looks a bit caveman from black now, black tries to undermine this pawn chain even further, trying to undermine white's king a little bit. Queen d2. Already gearing up for d6. Knight fd7. For the moment, this knight e5 would be nice. So I don't think white can actually go for d6 immediately. I think knight e5 might offer some counterplay. Again, I'm not 100% sure about this position, or maybe there's some other things going on. But anyway, so white actually squashed that e5 square by playing f4. And we see h4, so trying to undermine white's king. But also there's a positional thing about this. The g4 square is a bit weakened with this transaction now. hg, hg. Black has got that g4 square to work with. Knight f6. Bishop a3. Knight g4. It looks nice to have that g4 knight for the moment. White is trying to blast away like this and plays knight a4. And also, of course, knight b6 could be a pain to black as well. Black has to watch out for that. Actually, the queen is also on a5, so if rook b8, maybe even queen takes a5 at some point. So black actually exposed d6 diagonally by playing actually knight takes a4, b takes, at least doubling white's pawns. Queen c7 getting out of the way, bishop f3. Knight f6, knight b3, so exposing pressure now again. c5 creating a weakness, but this knight will take some time, a piece will take some time to use up d5 or b5 for that matter. So this c5 is necessary, it seems. Rook bd1. Now black counters here ingeniously, trying to protect d6 with rook a6, and this is quite ingenious. Or is it passive? I don't know. But black has gained, you know, some squares around here. It's not all bleak doom and gloom, this position for black, just because he has to play rook a6 to defend the d6 pawn. So it's a resourceful change in structure like this to accept, you know, potentially gaping hole on d5. But it's practical, you know, it's got control of g4. White's king safety has been slightly weakened. We see bishop b2. Queen c6. So this pawn is pinned at the moment to the bishop on f3. White takes on f6, bishop takes f6. I'm not sure how sound this is in the long run to do this. King g2, white is preparing a crude h-file attack, actually. Queen c7, rook h1, it's as crude as that, an h-file attack. Doubling rooks, wants to mate black. Maybe if this king gets out of the way, there'll be queen h2, so there'll be things trebled for rook h8. You think I'm kidding? Have a look at this. Queen e7, rook dh1. It's happening. Bishop d7, king g1. It's happening. We're going to treble. We're going to mate black on h8. Or maybe that's what white was thinking. Bishop c6, queen h2. Why not? Threaten rook h8. It's pretty dangerous for black. Black does have a defensive move here. Queen f6, of course. Double the pressure on h8 to defend. And also the king looks a bit awkward here for these checks. Maybe. If there's some checks which are going to happen. If this knight is not protecting d4, then we've got a check-in line. Queen h3. The rook goes back there. Knight d2. The knight leaves. So now there's a check. King f1. And we're approaching move 40, the blunder zone for most Grandmaster games. We're at move 36 now. So you can imagine, I guess, generally, Grandmasters like to use their time. that white didn't have that much time, maybe starts to play inaccurate moves. Rook h2, check. We get a few checks. We've reached move 40 now, king g1, check. Now we've passed the time control, check. Now f5 here. Look at this, queen is now, still protecting. The king's got f7 as well. Things look really bad for white. It just looks as though actually these pieces look misplaced. There's a lot of heavy artillery here, very expensive heavy artillery just on a flank file, when black has not just got central control going on here, but the king is an added bonus in the center. It looks like a total disaster for white, this position, after the time control. So e5, d takes. White tries to check. Black king just goes to f7. Forget about trying to win the rook. Just king f7. Cozy. Rook takes e8. Rook takes e8. Black's just clearly better, surely. And in fact here, white realised this position is pretty miserable and resigned. So it's a strange transformation that occurred, and some contortions. So that's why the structure interested me. It was the contortions that black did. I mean, it looks crazy to think about playing chess in this manner, to get this backward d pawn and then change it to a structure like this. Really? But it seemed to pay some dividends. I don't know what you think of that, or if it was to you a magic act for black to get counterplay here. It seemed white went a bit crazy down the h file, to be honest. So an impression is left of this game that I think you have to be a bit crazy to play these structures with black. Well, a risk taker. Should we say a risk taker? You need to be a risk taker. These are not very solid structures to play with, but on the other hand, there's dividends to be obtained. Some square control, some weaknesses, stuff like that to exploit. Let's have a look at another Nigel short game. So this was in his comeback, round 9. He was playing against Sebastian Mays at 2-5-3-6. And this is a very interesting, neat game. I thought quite elegant, really. Sicilian defence. He actually just avoids a lot of theory by playing d3. So knight c6, g3, closed Sicilian for the moment. Closed Sicilian. With rook b8, a sort of trendy idea. Pattern just for black to gain space on the queen side. a4, clamping down on that. a6. Now f4, d6, knight f3. Black does play b5, a takes, and now quite a surprising move in a way. Well, I think it is. This immediate e5, immediately playing e5 here, I think it's quite interesting. I don't think black can dare to try and just win a pawn here. I think white's going to get good compensation. I mean, for example, maybe c5 is weakened, maybe knight e4, stuff like that, or maybe taking first and then knight e4 after. So anyway, black has kind of ignored that with bishop g4. After castles, the knight finds h6 useful now, given that f6 has been taken away. h3, and white collects the light square bishop, but concedes a bit of control of d4. He's hitting the knight just comes to d4. Queen f2. Things look quite cozy for white though, overall. After castles, this knight's kind of misplaced, and now g4 squashes the knight a bit. The knight's got no squares. And of course, d takes, f takes, we're on the knight like this, there's no time for taking this pawn. We see king h8, giving the knight g8. It's a bit miserable. So white's opening seems to be a big success so far. Knight d5. Now I think if e6, actually we can perch the knight on f6 because of this g5. For example, like this, I think we can just play knight f6 here. If takes g5, I think. So black didn't play e6 anyway. Knight g8. After bishop e3, now e6. With the knight controlling f6, e6 seems more plausible. Nevertheless, interesting. Very interesting, actually. Very interesting. There's a square I wouldn't have thought white would be interested in this game up until this point. This b4 square, but actually it becomes interesting after bishop takes d4. So what does black want to do here after bishop takes d4? If, for example, e takes d, what's going on? It's intriguing, and I haven't engine checked this, but it's intriguing. What is going on here? It seems quite complicated. Let's not go there. Black actually played c takes d4, and we have this use for the knight b4 square, threatening knight c6. Or maybe we should work it out as an exercise. Let's have a quick look, because this looks quite promising for white, doesn't it? Before we go on in this game, let's have a quick look. I feel duty bound, unfortunately. Let's try and work this out. If bishop takes d5, e takes d5. If I give you guys, everyone, 20 seconds, what would you play here with white? Is there a strong continuation? Actually, I think there might. No, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. What would you play here with white? Let's have a quick look at this. Any ideas? I've got one idea. Finally, I've got one idea. Sorry. Yeah, I think there's an important tempo gainer. I can say something about this without. I can't check with an engine because of CPU, but I think I've seen one possibility, which is interesting for white. I think myself. So if no one says anything, I'm gonna just come out with it. I don't know if this is any good, but bishop c3 actually does seem reasonably plausible. I was just thinking d4. There's bishop a5 to gain an important tempo on the queen. If you can see any better, please let me know. But I think this might be the reason, because now we're still holding up with b4. I think the problem is the c5 pawn. I think so. Bishop d2 might be possible because we might. I don't know. We might want to take here, and then bishop takes b4 later. Okay, so that possibly is a reason. So anyway, c takes d4, knight b4, knight e7, defending against knight c6. Queen takes d4, d takes, queen's come off, rook b takes d8. And now this unfortunate invasion on the 7th rank seems quite painful. Actually, this poor knight's been tortured this game. It still hasn't got f5. It's having to go back, rather sick having to go back. Rook c7. And now we see rook d4 going after a pawn. c3, black takes that pawn. But now white plays rook a1, and it looks as though actually there's something horrible in store for this knight. It's about to be executed on c8 with basically rook a6 to c6. I mean, really, that knight is being tortured here. Black plays h5, maybe, I don't know, oblivious to it, as though white's going to do something about this g-pawn. There's no need. White can go and exterminate that knight with rook a6 to double on it. e4 is played, at least trying to get this e5 square. Or, I think there's another point here actually. I think it's to do with e3 and e2 actually, because rook c6 we're not doing anything with bishop e5, but maybe e3 is more to the point to play e2 here. This is a very dangerous pawn, although knight c2, that's interesting. Knight c2. I think I might be missing the point here. White played d4 in this position. In any case, there's a reason. There's probably a reason for this. White playing d4. Okay, he's giving black the pass pawn. He's getting rid of black's control of e5. Possibly. I'm making this up. Oh dear, oh dear. Okay. If rook c6, what about? I don't know. I think knight d6. We can skewer the rooks maybe. I don't know if this is any good to skewer the rooks and then play e3. Anyway, I'm pretty sure there must be a very good reason for d4. Rook g8, and the knight does get exterminated though. Bishop f8, rook takes c6, bishop takes b4, c takes. Black is collecting a lot of pawns though, so it doesn't seem entirely clear how white will manage with all these pawns coming at him. So white has only 3 pawns left and 2 of these are doubled. e3. So he's now losing his d pawn because e2 looks pretty serious as well, or b4. After that, rook takes e3, rook takes d4. Then he has to hold on to some of his pawns. Rook b3. King comes up. Rook d5, defending b5 for the moment. King f2, g5. And we see this. And we see check, check. And here I think some commentators have suggested that black's position might be quite full of more resistance here. I think if the rook hadn't abandoned this b5 pawn, because the bishop is staring at it, if black had played f5, I think there's some resistance to be found here in this position with these pawns. You know, maybe like these pawns are dangerous soon, even if white manages to come round, it takes time to win that b5. But for some reason, yeah, black got carried away maybe a bit with rook e4. So we see rook b3 and now check. And now rook h4, which does, you know, create a little trap of check here to win the rook. But now king f2 sidestepping that, and we're still staring at b5 here. Now the rook has abandoned the pawn, and black feels compelled to resign, because once we take this pawn's going to go with the rook. Quite justified on b3. I thought it was an entertaining game anyway. Quite a complex game, one that needs detailed analysis really, but you know, very interesting I thought. So I hope you found that interesting, that one. There's another Nigel short game. This has some immense complexity around it. So this is against in round 3 actually, against Stefan Docx. Strange name to have an X in the end of it. So Stefan Docx is 2468. And Nigel Short adopts the English opening c4, and we get a quiet start to the game, except g4 is thrown in for a laugh. This is quite adventurous control of d5. It seems actually quite logical to try and undermine black's control of d5. Black reacts in the centre with d5, g5, d4, g takes, d takes, fg. So quite an unusual position to start the game off. I guess not much opening theory here. Queen e7, knight e2, bishop d7, rook g1. At least white's rooks are enjoying the position. That rook is enjoying this position, even if it's not theoretical. So queen b3, black castles, white castles, h5, bishop g2. This bishop is also looking okay. Bishop h6. And there might be some knight d4. Because of this pin, there might be a knight d4 on the cards at some point. Maybe after moving the bishop. we see bishop d5, queen c5, knight g3. It does look at h5, but I don't know. That's moved knight e4. That's the point to get the tempo on the queen, really. Queen e7. Queen b5. And it looks as though this supports knight c5 to target b7, for example. Black now stops white's use of c5 with bishop f8. Okay, so now stopping that use of c5, we see f4. Okay, so that pressure on that diagonal is interesting. a6. Okay, so queen drops back. Bishop h6. This is getting a bit sharp. There's pressure on this diagonal, but there's pressure on this pawn chain here as well. Okay, rook ge1. What is going on here? Well, there's pressure on f6. Black is not really in a position to take on f4 without dropping f6. Rook hf8. But maybe now this looks more of a concern. F takes. F takes. King b1. Bishop g4. Rook c1. I think white has a very fine position here. It's nice. This knight is in front of now an isolated pawn. That's pretty bad to have these pieces so well centralized. Rook f3, bad for black's point of view. And now white has this option to take out of damaging the pawn structure here. So pretty miserable stuff. Bishop takes c6, b takes. Takes time for king a1. After bishop takes e3, we see queen a4. So white's going in for the kill, it seems, and offering the whole rook to speed things up. You see, if the queen can come to a6 and the knight somehow can come to c5, this would be really dangerous. But at the moment, the queen's protecting c5. So this speeds things up, though. Bishop takes c1, we see bishop b4. Because now the knight can come protected by the bishop. This looks extremely dangerous for mating black on b7. The knight would stop the king escaping. Now, a very interesting moment, this position here, where black actually has a computer-like defense, well, found by computers. I don't know how easily it would have been for normal people just analyzing this game to find a defense here. This looks like a very, very critical position for black, but it's intriguing. Where is it here? Am I making this up? No, it's not here. Where is it? I'm losing the plot here. Is it this position? Yes, no, I see it now. Sorry, yes. No, it is a computer-like defense. Okay, black has a move here which might defend things, which is hard to spot. Because white is actually threatening quite a lot of things. In the game, we see rook e3, and white now just took on c5 on c1. Pardon me. And black played c5, and after bishop takes c5, black actually resigned. Actually, this is a horrible fork here. So, but actually, there was an interesting move picked up by the computers here in queen f7. And so this creates this battery here, which could be useful, you might think. But after queen takes a6, say, it's too dangerous, I think, to play king d7 in this position. I think the reason for this is rook d. Is the reason rook d1 or knight c5? There's a reason this is too dangerous anyway, but the line which I'm aware of is king b8, bishop c5, and black's computer-like X-ray defense. I wonder if you can spot it. What would black play here to try and defend this stuff? So black to play has a move here. What would you play in this position with black? if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now. Any ideas? It's not bishop takes b2. It's not this bishop takes b2, by the way. Yeah, I'll show you. Bishop e3. Apparently this defends. Apparently, well, because it's kind of an X-ray defense. Actually, I nearly blundered with an X-ray defense last night by analogy. It was but I didn't, thankfully. But there's an X-ray defense here. So here, I don't think White's got anything in this position because this back row is a bit weak as well. So this looks as though it's a promising defensive line, which would have given Black the advantage. But that's the nature of human chess. There's these things in the background lurking around, these resources, like Queen f7, okay, which wasn't played. So instead Black collapsed, and this was just brilliant for White. And Black resigned here. Okay, let's have a look at another game. Vachier-Lagrave against actually my last game to show you, the French #1. I think he's #1 at the moment, maybe, or he's in the top 5. So he did very well in the tournament. This is his round 5 game. Vachier-Lagrave against Sandro Morco. I thought this is quite Tau-esque, this game. So we see a Sicilian defense. D4 takes, knight c6, knight c3, queen c7, bishop e2, knight f6, bishop e3. Okay, we got a standard looking Sicilian defense position. Bastrikov variation or something, might have been earlier, but anyway, this early g4 looks quite impressive, and it's followed up even more impressively. Well, Black is threatening bishop h4, to be honest. So White seals up that h4 square with h4. I guess you might also consider bishop f2, but that doesn't look as impressive as playing h4 here. If you want to like squash Black or give the impression of squashing Black on the king side, I think there's nothing like 4 pawns in a row here for a visual impression. So a6, the knight drops back, queen c7, g5, knight a5, but Black surely has got this c4 square to work with at the very least. Counterplay, h5, b5, but now interesting Tau-like sacrifice, which if you follow the channel today, actually there was Tau games, and one of them was against Bent Larsen, and there was a very interesting concept in that game, and it seems to be reflected here. So this knight f5 was played. Wow, knight f5, just to get this very juicy looking knight d5 with tempo. E takes, knight d5. So it looks quite juicy, but is it worth a piece? After queen c6, well, there's a pawn for a piece now. And also this diagonal looks good for this bishop. Knight c4, bishop just goes there anyway, bishop f3. Knight takes e3, drags the knight back. Queen c5, hitting the knight though. Queen d2, rook b8. So what has White got for the piece? His pawns, I think White's pawns look even more impressive, just from an aesthetic point of view. And Black's pieces are kind of hemmed in, a bit like the Tau game against the classic one against Bent Larsen. So the pieces are hemmed in. White's not that keen to open up any lines at the moment, but rather squash the pieces a little bit. And b4 pushes the queen back now, all the way to a7 to avoid, knight d5. Say what was on b6. White now just castles queenside, which means the knight is not pinned. If he had castled kingside, the knight would have been pinned. We see bishop b7, and white, a piece down, just takes on b7. Rook takes b7. h6, just undermining, gaining more space here. g6. Knight d5, and now it looks as though black's king has got to get out of here. Surely. Knight b6. It doesn't. The rook actually just protects for the moment. So black's pieces are a bit crowded here, trying to defend things. And white gets another opportunity to win another pawn. That bishop's the only thing defending d6 here. Is that white's intention? Well, actually, after knight takes, rook takes, we don't see queen takes d6. Because maybe then knight c4 could be... No, then queen d8. No, let's not say something silly. Queen d6 does look dangerous, but maybe... Okay, let's have a quick look at this. Not knight c4. We're going to get mated on d8. Maybe it's too dangerous even to castle. This is a really precarious position. Indeed. I don't really like to comment what the defense is for black here. I mean, possibly queen c7. Because if we castled, this is why I don't want to comment on this. Queen f6. This could be embarrassing. I don't know. So anyway, funny enough though, white didn't take the d6 pawn. White actually played queen c3, so preventing black from castling. Looking at g7, so we could just mate on g7 if black did castle. Rook g8, and now check. King d8. This looks quite painful now. Why didn't the king want to go to f8? Maybe the pin, So anyway, white is picking up the d6 pawn in any case, and black just has an awkward looking position. Knight d7. f6 looks quite squashy. Rook e6. This is just taken. Takes rook d1. It just looks horrible. Queen c7. Winning another pawn now. Queen takes a6. So how many pawns for the piece now? It's more than enough for the knight. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 pawns and the knight's pinned. Queen takes f4 check. Rook d2. Because otherwise if this pawn would be with check. Check. King b2. Queen goes to c4. Queen d6. And it's also got e7 as well as d7. Queen c7. But now a really cruel move, f7. And this is winning outright because this f8. If takes, we can just take this. And if rook f8, I think we can just take this. And if the rook moves, we can just queen. And then, yeah. So f7, it's end of game. Sorry, in this position. After f7, that's end of game. And so that concludes the interesting games to check out this week from Gibraltar. Yeah, I hope you found that interesting. I'll be uploading this to YouTube. If you've got any questions on games, just leave them there. So otherwise, okay, thanks for watching. Maybe see you next week, same time, for some other interesting games. Okay. Thanks very much.